June 4, 1942, 4:30 hours. On the bridge of the carrier Akagi, 40 nautical miles northwest of Midway, Commander Minoru Genda, weakened by pneumonia, stood in pajamas as the Japanese strike force readied for launch. In the darkness before dawn, 4 carriers, 11 battleships, and more than 200 ships formed the most powerful fleet Japan had ever assembled. For 6 months of war, this armada had never been defeated. The Imperial Japanese Navy's confidence was unshakable. They had crippled or sunk 8 American battleships at Pearl Harbor, conquered the Philippines, humbled Britain at Singapore, and taken an empire spanning 20 million square miles. Now, they intended to wipe out the last remnants of American naval strength in the Pacific. That morning, Genda and every Japanese officer believed the U.S. had no more than 2 carriers left in service, both assumed to be operating in the South Pacific. Yorktown, badly damaged at Coral Sea, was thought to need months of repair. Radio silence, they believed, guaranteed surprise. None imagined Admiral Chester Nimitz had been reading their communications for weeks. American codebreakers had cracked JN-25B, the Japanese naval cipher. While Genda studied his charts 233, U.S. aircraft were being armed on 3 carriers the Japanese believed absent. Within 14 hours, the Imperial Navy would suffer its first major defeat, losing 4 carriers and more than 3,500 aviators and crew. The illusion of Japanese invincibility would burn with those ships, and with it, Japan's chance to win the Pacific. Initially, the numbers still favored Japan. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto commanded the combined fleet with overwhelming force. 8 carriers to America's 3, 11 battleships to none, and 248 aircraft against roughly 233. Operation MI called for 200 vessels, spread across vast stretches of ocean. According to Japanese after-action reports, their assessment of U.S. weakness seemed correct. In the 6 months since Pearl Harbor, Japan's victories had surpassed expectations. The fall of Singapore with 85,000 troops, the destruction of the Abda fleet in the Java Sea, and the conquest of Burma. Each triumph deepened belief in Japanese superiority. Even so, doubts lingered. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the carrier strike force, had raised concerns about the plan's complexity. His chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, warned it violated the principle of concentration of force. But these worries, like those voiced before Pearl Harbor, were brushed aside. Japan's strategy relied on dangerous assumptions, later recorded in post-war interrogations. American carriers were far to the south. Yorktown required 3 months in dock. U.S. torpedo planes were ineffective. American pilots were inexperienced. And most critically, radio silence meant security. At Pearl Harbor's Station HYPO, Commander Joseph Rochefort led his team of codebreakers in sweltering basement conditions. By May 1942, they could read fragments of 15–20% of Japanese naval traffic, enough to reconstruct intentions. The breakthrough came with repeated references to AF. Rochefort suspected it meant Midway. To prove it, Captain Jasper Holmes proposed a ruse. Midway sent an uncoded message reporting water distillation failure. 2 days later, Japanese intercepts in JN-25 confirmed AF was short of fresh water. Nimitz's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, later told Congress, "We knew their objectives, their routes, their timetables. We could predict with remarkable accuracy which ships would be where and when." This intelligence victory revealed not only the target, but also the order of battle. The attack date, June 4th or 5th, and even approach routes. Nimitz could now position his carriers northeast of Midway, in the one sector Japanese search planes would miss. The Yorktown's return highlighted U.S. industrial strength. Hit hard at Coral, see by a bomb through her flight deck and near misses rupturing fuel tanks, she was expected to be out of action for months. Instead, Pearl Harbor's repair crews restored her in just 72 hours. From May 27–29, 400 workers labored without pause. Teams even stayed aboard during her voyage to Midway, continuing repairs at sea. To Japanese planners accustomed to weeks of yard time, such speed seemed impossible. June 4th, 04:30 hours. Admiral Nagumo launched 108 aircraft against Midway, 36 Kate, torpedo bombers, 36 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. The takeoff was flawless, showing the skill honed through half a year of victories. But Nagumo made a fateful choice. He dispatched only 7, search planes instead of the standard 22. A delayed launch from cruiser Tone, caused by catapult trouble, left one scout airborne 30 minutes late, a delay that would prove disastrous. At 0534, a PBY Catalina patrol plane sighted the Japanese fleet. By 0553, Midway radar tracked the incoming strike. Every flyable aircraft was launched, marine fighters, torpedo planes, dive bombers, even B-17s. The Americans were ready. At 700, Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, leading the strike on Midway, radioed, "There is need for a second attack wave." Midway's defenses were tougher than expected. Its airfield still usable, Admiral Nagumo now faced the decision that would decide the battle. His reserve aircraft were loaded with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes for anti-ship strikes, with no enemy fleet yet located. At 0715, he ordered them rearmed with fragmentation bombs for a second strike against the island. This decision, recorded in surviving Japanese logs, triggered chaos on the hangar decks. Japanese doctrine required that unused ordnance be returned to the magazines, but time pressure led to a deadly shortcut. By 0728, bombs and torpedoes were stacked openly on the hangar floors. At that moment, Tone's delayed scout plane finally reported sighting what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships, bearing 010dig, distance 240 miles from Midway. The vague message set off frantic speculation. Could this be the carrier force they feared? At 0745, Nagumo demanded clarification on ship types. The reply would not arrive for another 30 crucial minutes. Between 0920 and 1020, 3 American torpedo squadrons found the Japanese carriers. Their attacks looked suicidal. Outdated TBD devastators lumbering along at 120 knots charged directly into Zero fighters capable of nearly 330 knots. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet attacked first. Out of 15 aircraft, 14 were destroyed almost immediately. Ensign George Gay, the lone survivor, floated in the sea as his squadron was wiped out. In his report afterward, he described Zeros cutting through the formation repeatedly, tearing down plane after plane. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14 aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12. Not a single torpedo struck a Japanese ship. Japanese post-battle accounts dismissed the assaults as reckless bravery without effect. What they failed to realize was that these doomed attacks dragged every Zero down to sea level, leaving the skies above unguarded. At 1020, Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky's dive bombers from Enterprise appeared overhead. McClusky had flown past his projected intercept point but reasoned correctly to turn north, following the wake of a destroyer racing back to the fleet. His after-action report noted that the carrier decks were crowded with aircraft being prepared for launch. No high-altitude fighters were in sight. At 1022, the dive bombing began. Lieutenant Richard Best's 1,000-pound bomb pierced Akagi's flight deck, detonating in the hangar among the stacked ordnance. Within seconds, secondary explosions ripped through the carrier. Simultaneously, Yorktown's bombers struck. Soryu, 3 hits transformed her into a firestorm within half a minute. Kaga was struck 4 times by Enterprise's dive bombers, the first bomb exploding amid refueling aircraft near the forward elevator. By 1028, 3 Japanese carriers were mortally wounded. The numbers were staggering. Of 41 dive bombers that attacked, only 3 were shot down. In 6 minutes, the balance of naval power in the Pacific shifted forever. The carriers did not die quickly. Surviving officers later gave detailed accounts in post-war interrogations. Akagi burned for nearly 12 hours. Captain Taijiro Aoki tried to save her until 200 on June 5th. When Yamamoto ordered abandonment, at 0450, destroyers scuttled her with 4 Type 93 torpedoes. She slipped beneath the sea at 0520 with 267 dead. Kaga's fires raged out of control after firefighting mains ruptured. Commander Takahisa Amagai ordered abandonment at 1640. She exploded and sank at 1925 with 8111 casualties, the highest of the 4 carriers. Soryu burned for 9 hours before going under at 1913. On June 4th, her captain, Ryusaku Yanagimoto, chose to remain aboard. Witnesses said he was last seen on the bridge as the ship went down, along with 711 men. Hiryu, the sole survivor of the morning strikes, managed to launch 2 counterattacks that heavily damaged Yorktown. But at 1700, American dive bombers found her, scoring 4 hits. She lingered until door 900 on June 5th before sinking. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi and Captain Tomeo Kaku went down with her. Along with Ford's 16 crew, Yorktown's ordeal demonstrated American superiority in damage control. Despite 3 bomb hits in Hiryu's first strike and 2 torpedo hits in the second, she stayed afloat for 2 days. Only when submarine I-168 struck her with torpedoes on June 6th did she finally sink on June 7th. Total American losses were 307 dead, 1 carrier, Yorktown, 1 destroyer, Hammond, and 150 aircraft. Japanese losses were devastating: 3,057 dead, 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, Mikuma, sunk June 6th, 248 aircraft, and over 110 veteran air crews that could never be replaced. Post-war studies revealed just how decisive American intelligence had been. A National Security Agency history, declassified in 2006, confirmed Station HYPO had provided the exact attack date within 1 day, the full Japanese order of battle, the approach routes, and even the plan to occupy Midway afterward. The study concluded that no operation in history had ever begun with such complete knowledge of enemy intentions. At 23:55 on June 4th, Admiral Yamamoto canceled Operation MI and ordered a general withdrawal. Aboard the super battleship Yamato, 300 miles behind the carriers with the most formidable surface fleet ever assembled, he was powerless to change the outcome. His staff briefly considered a night surface engagement, calculating they could reach the American carriers by 0200, but without air cover, and with dawn certain to bring American planes, the risk was too great. The withdrawal marked the first time in the war that a Japanese operation had been abandoned because of enemy resistance. Midway's significance extended far beyond immediate losses. On June 4, 1942, every following Japanese operation became defensive or reactionary. The loss of pilots was especially devastating. 110 aircrew members were gone, each averaging more than 800 flight hours. Many veterans dating back to the 1937 China conflict, Japan's pre-war training pipeline, produced only about 100 aviators per year, while the U.S. Navy was already turning out 2,500 pilots every month. Japanese naval doctrine, built on the decisive battle concept, inherited from their 1905 triumph at Tsushima, was rendered obsolete. The Americans had proven that modern naval warfare depended on industry and intelligence rather than warrior spirit. Production numbers highlighted the disparity. After Midway, Japan launched just 12 carriers before the war's end, compared to America's 541, 17 fleet carriers and 124 escort carriers. Aircraft production from 1942 to 1945 told the same story. Japan produced roughly 65,000, while the U.S. manufactured 297,000. By 1944, Japanese aviators entered combat with only 150-200 hours of training, sometimes fewer than 100. Their American counterparts averaged more than 600 hours. The industrial gap was equally severe. U.S. national income was 17 times that of Japan before the war, and America supplied 2/3 of all Allied weapons and equipment. Japanese post-war technical studies identified major systemic weaknesses: carrier design flaws, enclosed hangars that trapped blasts, poor fire suppression, inadequate ventilation, and ineffective damage control practices. Their Zero fighters achieved speed and agility by sacrificing survivability, no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Pilot rescue procedures were almost non-existent. Operational shortcomings compounded the problem. Reduced search flights, 7 aircraft instead of the doctrinal 22. Sloppy radio discipline despite attempts at silence. Rigid tactical methods and failure to adapt under pressure. In contrast, American damage control proved decisive. Yorktown's survival after multiple bomb and torpedo strikes showcased superior training and design. U.S. crews were universally drilled in firefighting, supported by advanced CO2 systems, foam generators, portable pumps, redundant compartment layouts, and a doctrine that emphasized saving the ship over dying for honor. Japanese carriers, by comparison, were fatally exposed to single bomb strikes that triggered massive secondary explosions among their own stored munitions. The intelligence factor was equally crucial. Admiral Nimitz later assessed that without early information on Japanese intentions, Midway's outcome would have been radically different. Station HYPO's work went far beyond codebreaking. They enabled precise carrier positioning, fortified Midway's defenses, prevented wasteful responses to Japanese feints, and delivered tactical surprise despite inferior numbers. Japanese after-action testimonies revealed leadership failures, hesitation over rearming, delayed launches, poor reconnaissance, weak coordination with supporting forces, and a strategic plan too complex to succeed, running simultaneous Aleutian operations and dividing their strength further magnified risk. Worst of all, they underestimated American capabilities, ignoring intelligence signals such as heightened U.S. radio traffic. The pilot losses at Midway began a downward spiral. Before the battle, Japanese aviators logged 500-700 hours over 2 years of training. Afterward, emergency programs cut that to 150-200 hours in 4 months. By 1944, some rookies had fewer than 100 hours. Meanwhile, U.S. training expanded 400 hours in 1942, 500 in 1943, and over 600 in 1944. The experience gap became impossible to bridge. At the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Japanese pilots averaging 200 hours went up against Americans with 600 plus. The result was catastrophic. 346 Japanese planes lost versus only 30 American. Captured records showed Japanese planners fully understood the industrial imbalance. Matching U.S. carrier output would require 3 times Japan's entire steel production. Matching aircraft output would demand 4 times their aluminum capacity. Equalizing pilot training was impossible without fuel oil reserves. Japan simply lacked. The math guaranteed defeat. Midway's ripple effect was visible in every Pacific campaign that followed. At Guadalcanal in August 1942, Japan could only commit forces piecemeal, unable to concentrate carrier strength lost at Midway. At Santa Cruz in October 1942, they scored a tactical win but lost 99 aviators against 26 Americans, attrition they could not sustain. By June 1944 at the Philippine Sea, Japan's rebuilt carrier force collapsed, losing 476 aircraft and 450 crew in the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Technological gaps widened as well. The U.S. deployed shipborne radar. Japan relied solely on visual spotting. American ships used TBS radios for coordination. Japanese forces depended on flags and lights. U.S. cryptographers read JN-25. Japanese never broke American codes. America kept refining designs while Japanese factories could not be retooled mid-war. Post-war testimonies underscored the lessons. Captain Tairo Hakiofakagi admitted that a single bomb doomed his ship due to improper ordnance handling. Commander Yasuji Watanabe, Yamamoto's operations officer, stated in interrogation that Yamamoto realized immediately after Midway that Japan had lost the war, though it was never declared publicly, and Ensign George Gay, the lone survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, bore witness to the sacrifice that opened the path to victory. His detailed after-action account offered vital insight into Japanese carrier operations during the battle. Modern scholarship, particularly Jonathan Parshall and Anthony Ware, Tully's Shattered Sword, 2005, has corrected many long-standing misconceptions. Myth: Japanese carriers were only 5 minutes away from launching their strike when attacked. Reality: operational records show that preparing and arming aircraft required at least 30-40 minutes. Myth: Nagumo could have ordered an immediate partial strike. Reality: Japanese doctrine demanded fully coordinated mass attacks. Partial launches were neither trained nor considered viable. Myth: Japanese reconnaissance simply suffered from bad luck. Reality: their inadequate search coverage was the product of doctrine, not chance. The impact of Midway reached far beyond the battle itself. Strategic lessons became clear. Intelligence superiority can offset numerical inferiority. Industrial capacity ultimately decides the outcome of prolonged wars. Technological adaptation outweighs early advantages. Logistics and production power are more decisive than individual tactical brilliance. Naval doctrine also evolved. Carriers were never again concentrated in such vulnerable groups. Greater emphasis was placed on radar, electronic warfare, and effective damage control. Preservation of trained pilots became a higher priority than dying for honor. Admiral Chester Nimitz summarized it plainly in his official report. The Battle of Midway was essentially a victory of intelligence. We knew Japanese intentions, strength, and schedule. They knew nothing of ours. Japanese naval historian Mitsuru Yoshida echoed this, writing, "After Midway, we were defending, not attacking." The decisive Battle of the Pacific War was fought on June 4, 1942. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, analyzing Japanese records after the war, concluded that the Imperial Navy never recovered from the losses of Midway. Every campaign that followed, Guadalcanal, the Solomons, the Philippine Sea, was constrained by what had been lost between June 4th and 5th, 1942. Statistical summary: Japanese forces, 4 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 11 battleships, 16 cruisers, 46 destroyers, 2 48 carrier-based aircraft. American forces, 3 fleet carriers, 0 battleships, 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, 233 carrier aircraft, 127 land-based aircraft. Losses: Japan, 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, 3,057 dead, including 110 elite aviators. United States, 1 fleet carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, 307 dead. Timeline: Japanese carrier dominance 04300928. Nearly 5 hours. American decisive strikes 10:22, 10:28, just 6 minutes. Total battle duration 0430. June 4th to 0900, June 5th. Thirds roughly 28 hours. Midway endures as proof that intelligence and preparation outweigh surprise and strength. Industrial capacity outlasts warrior spirit. Technological innovation can erase an initial edge. Hubris remains the deadliest enemy in war. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, Japan unleashed the most powerful carrier strike force in history. By sunset, it was shattered. The Americans reversed the course of the Pacific War, not through chance, but through intelligence, readiness, and unmatched industrial power. In just 6 minutes of concentrated dive bomber attacks, the outcome of the Pacific War was effectively sealed. From that moment, every battle Japan fought was under the shadow of inevitable defeat. Though the empire would continue the struggle for 3 more years, its hope of victory died with 4 carriers north of Midway. The battle demonstrated that modern naval warfare had become a contest of intelligence, technology, and industrial capacity. Japan entered with superior tactics and experience. America entered with superior intelligence and the means to replace its losses. In that clash, the future overcame the past. Midway stands as the U.S. Navy's greatest victory, not only for its tactical brilliance, but because it validated the principle that democratic industry and innovation could triumph over militaristic skill. The Japanese expected a quick and easy victory. Instead, they met the beginning of their empire's downfall.